Okay, we are recording now. So we are joined tonight by Ashley Overhouse. She is a she, her pronouns. Currently, she's the Water Policy Advisor for Defenders of Wildlife California program, and she's on the Board of Directors for the Central Valley Joint Venture. And previously, I knew her when she worked on the water policy team at Friends of the River with the Storage Response Group. So storied, amazing career so far, and plenty ahead. So we would love to hear from Ashley. I hope everyone had a chance to watch her short film Motus Avium. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I've asked Ashley to first just tell us a bit about herself and her background, because it's her whole career is stuff that we're interested in, and then to talk a bit about her current work and the film, and then we can open it up to questions. So Ashley, if you're ready.
Thanks, Katie, and thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure. I really admire all the work that you do, especially with the stopping the Delta Tunnel. So it's an honor for me to be here as well. So again, hello. Thank you for the kind introduction, Katie. My name is Ashley Overhouse. I'm the Water Policy Advisor with Defenders of Wildlife in the California program. I started this position last June, and I took over for my predecessor, Rachel Zwillinger, who was appointed to California EPA, which is the only reason why I think that she left her post of 8 years. Defenders of Wildlife, under Rachel's direction, as well as other incredible women, Kim Delfino and Pamela Flick, have advocated for sustainable California water policy for the last couple decades. So I am honored to take over that portfolio of work and help continue that legacy. Part of our work is being the Central Valley Joint Venture that you saw a little bit, hopefully, in the film, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But before I get to that, just a little bit about me. I have a background in water law and policy. I went to law school at UC Hastings and graduated in 2016. I also attended the University of London, SOAS, where I graduated with an LLM, or what's called a Master's in Law in International Environmental Law. So I came back to California after my year in London and was really hopeful with the passage of the Human Right to Water, SGMA, or the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, that California was on its way really, truly to making some serious reforms in California water law and policy. And it is because of that that I really wanted to then inform policy rather than practice law. So rather than becoming a water law attorney, I instead went to work at the South Yuba River Citizens League, more affectionately known as CIRCLE, which is a watershed group based in the Yuba River watershed, Nevada City, California, for those that are familiar. And I was very grateful to have the opportunity to be the river policy manager there for 3 years. And after that, I transitioned to being the policy director at Friends of the River, where I met Katie and other incredible people who worked on statewide policy. And I was very happy to work to advocate for healthy, flowing, free rivers on behalf of Friends of the River for about a year. And that was when the opportunity presented itself to transition to Defenders of Wildlife, where I have a little bit of the same portfolio, just with some additional added scope for federal water issues. So that is really where I've jumped in terms of my career in water policy. I have a background in hydropower from being chair of the California Hydropower Reform Coalition while I was at Friends of the River. Like Katie mentioned, I helped lead the Storage Response Group, which is both an email information sharing service that FOR hosts, as well as an incredible biweekly call to bring people together across the state and sometimes the West Coast to look at storage response. And that's a really important mission. And I'm still, for those that are interested, a board member at Friends of the River. So if you would like me to put on my Friends of the River board member hat at any point, I am also more than happy to do so. So that is a little bit about me in a nutshell. Personally, I am still a club member and have been, so you all know, of the Loma Prieta chapter. I am based in San Jose, California, born and raised here, and very grateful to have the privilege to still remain here and work remotely for Defenders of Wildlife. And I do go to Sacramento when needed. as well as, of course, various different refuges and wetlands that we'll talk about later, and the beauty of California's water landscape, which is particularly wet right now, which I'm very grateful for in certain areas. So I think at this point, I'd like to move to a little bit about Defenders of Wildlife, what I work on and why it's relevant / supportive of this works group, or this group's work, excuse me. It's late on a Wednesday for me. Then hopefully we can get a little to the film, but I don't want to, if everyone has watched it, maybe it'd be most efficient to do a Q&A at that point. So at Defenders of Wildlife, we really work to conserve imperiled species, protect habitat, promote coexistence, combat climate change, and speak for wildlife through the enforcement of the Endangered Species Act. I add on a little bit there that I also, in my position, work through the enforcement of the Clean Water Act, state equivalent of those laws, so the State Endangered Species Act, as well as the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, which I know is quite a mouthful, but I shorten it to CVPIA. It's a really important law for our advocacy in wetlands, which is why I flag it here for you. California is really an incredibly diverse, both geographically and with wildlife. So when you're looking at it from the lens of water, I focus on 2 geographic areas really to help narrow the scope, but also because I'm a team of 1 that looks at water with my colleagues in the program at Defenders. There are 4 others on my team, and they work on a variety of other issues such as coastal resilience, sea otters, renewable energy issues, and Sierras, the High Sierras, watersheds, and wildlife that live there. So I am lucky enough to look at this from a water perspective, but because of that, I have to, for my own sanity's sake, narrow my scope to the Bay Delta estuary and the Central Valley wetlands. So as you all know, those are still quite expansive areas that are that encompass quite a bit of issues. But so you all know, I do not specialize in the Colorado River, and I do not specialize in Mono Lake issues or the Salton Sea. So I just wanted to disclaimer that unfortunately I will not be able to help answer your questions if you have those about those particular areas. But I know that there are plenty of other incredible people in this state that should be able to talk about those issues and work on those. So I focus on the San Francisco Bay Delta estuary because, as you all know, there are several now listed fisheries species, as well as several bird species, and the giant garter snake that depend on a healthy Bay Delta estuary, not to mention that it is the heart of California's water system. As a San Jose resident, I know that I drink Delta water as well as a mix of groundwater every day. So I am personally and professionally invested in a healthy Bay Delta estuary. And I am very lucky to be able to put that passion into work every day through Defenders. We are very concerned and have been about every single iteration of the Delta Tunnel or Delta Tunnels, Delta Conveyance Project, California Water Fix, the very, however you would like to refer to it. I was very grateful to be able to contribute to comments and sign on to comments on both the recent DEIR and DEIS with our partners at NRDC, San Francisco Baykeeper, the Bay Institute, Golden Salmon State Association, and others that signed on. And I am just also grateful to the club and its members for their continued work, monitoring, and opposition about the project. It is incredibly concerning and something that I am actively tracking as a water policy advocate, like as many of you are. So that is just one project as part of my portfolio. I'm also trying to work on different other, as you all know, threats to the Delta. We really advocate for the Water Board to update the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. It is the bare minimum that we should legally be doing for the health of the Delta, for the communities, both people and wildlife that depend on a healthy Delta. So with that being said, that means that Defenders of Wildlife is opposed to the voluntary agreements. which are being proposed as a substitute for obligations under the Bay Delta Plan update. We also are trying to advocate for a sound update to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. There's various different processes within that that we engage in with a water board and track both with the Central Valley Project operations and state water project operations. Defenders of Wildlife is also a litigant in challenging the Trump 2019 biological opinions for those projects on the Bay Delta, which I don't know how many people are familiar with those, but those were the biological opinions that really codified the just the undermining of most of the environmental laws and protections we had on the Bay Delta under the Trump administration, and continues today. So right now we have an interim operations plan that is guiding what the water flows are in the Delta for the Central Valley Project and state water projects on the Delta. And that is administered by the court. So as a litigant, we get to try to inform that as much as we can, and we're still fighting right now. So that's as much as I can really tell you, but I wanted to just let you all know about what our role is in that litigation as well. That's very important because that will hopefully push the quality protections for the Bay Delta in a better direction as we are undergoing reconsultation on those biological opinions with agencies right now. So while that's undergoing, we're trying to help with that consultation process to the best of our ability. So alongside, defenders in that litigation is, of course, our partner NRDC. And I'm very grateful to their leadership in that arena. The other area that we really focus on to move from the Delta, and its many different threats, which I'm more than happy to answer more questions about that later, is the Central Valley and what's left of our remaining inland wetlands. So the Central Valley is part of the Pacific Flyway. So not only does California get to contribute to international legal obligations to protect the Pacific Flyway under the Migratory Birds Treaty. So my international law background was thrilled to finally come into a little bit of a useful applicability here in my aspect of my job, but also we have some obligations under the joint ventures. So as I mentioned before, I am a board member of the Central Valley Joint Ventures. Joint ventures are truly collaborations between state and federal agencies, NGOs, and one corporation. In our case, it's PG&E. And so it is a 30-person or so collaboration of those organizations, and truly the mission is to save the last remaining habitat for shorebirds, waterfowl, and the giant garter snake. And I am very proud to help with that collaborative work. Under the joint ventures scope, regionally, we help with funding restoration projects, expansion of state and national wildlife refuges, helping advocate for the full implementation and enforcement of the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, or CVPIA, which I mentioned earlier, and really looking to make sure that the refuges that we have in the state are protected. Wetlands are incredibly valuable to the state, not just for wildlife, but for climate resilience. As buffers, both tidal and inland wetlands are incredible buffers for the climate extremes that our state has been suffering, that I've heard someone talk about a little bit, I think, beforehand, right as I got onto the call. Wetlands are incredibly useful and an essential part of our landscape. And they used to be plentiful across all the Central Valley. And so I'm very proud to be part of the Central Valley Joint Venture, and that's what the film Motus Avium focuses on. Though I did not have the pleasure or privilege of being part of the film, it was created before my time at Defenders. Many of our partners are showcased in the film, and it's just trying to bring more awareness and elevate the issues that wetlands and refuges face in California, especially in times of critical drought, and the opportunities for collaboration with a potentially unusual partner, which are rice farmers. So I know you all heard the term thrown around of multi-benefit projects, and sometimes what does that really mean? On the ground here for the Central Valley Joint Venture, it's incredibly important that we have some rice fields in proximity, close proximity to refuges, because they supply critical food source for the birds that come through, because we only have 5% of the last remaining wetlands on the landscape, and still relatively very large populations of birds that rely on that small amount of landscape. Rice acts as a supplement for the wetlands that we don't have anymore. So not only does it provide food, but it also provides additional space to help with issues like bird flu and disease for overcrowding. And then it also helps with ensuring that water gets to those refuges. Under the CVPIA, those legal transfers are controlled through contracts, and sometimes they have to pass through those agricultural farmers in order to get to refuges. Just logistically, conveyance of the water through there to the refuges if they can. So if they are on rice farms versus, let's say, fallowed land, or orchards like almond orchards, those don't provide any benefits really to wetlands or to the wildlife that depend on those refuges. Additionally, we have worked through the Central Valley Joint Venture, a number of our partners, to help create additional habitat on those rice farms. So either through easements or through additional expansion of refuges, or really just allowing the water to sit on the land longer. They act as wetlands, so it keeps the water on the landscape longer in the year, which is important for species that really depend on nesting sometimes in the spring, or for giant garter snake, they emerge from hibernation in the spring. So if you already don't have enough water on the landscape in like April, or even March or April, so I know this is an unusually wet year, but in other years past, we sometimes don't have the pleasure of these late spring storms. So then they're emerging to no water on the landscape, which is very devastating for listed species. So that is really my work. Apologies for talking your ears off there about something I'm very passionate about, which is the wetlands in particular. But that is really what I had prepared, Katie, for.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I already had some questions about the film, but now I have 8 more questions from just listening to you speak. But I will see who wants to go first, and if folks can raise their little hand on Zoom. And then I muted folks while she was speaking, so you might be muted and not have noticed. Jan.
Ashley, you did a great job and got a lot of information in a short time, and no uhs and ahs. Amazing. And I was, when I watched the film, one of the things that struck me were the rice fields. And it was a good thing that you had all the explanation in the film about the benefit for the wild fowl and so forth. Because my concept is rice takes so much water, oh my gosh, So I appreciate learning that, and because I think of it more in the Northern California than I do Central. And in terms of the birds and the waterfowl and overcrowding, and as all animals, how do you keep the wetlands healthy from normal activities from birds? And it's like anything, if you have a whole lot of an animal in one area, so how do you keep without, and if you're not getting rain to dissolve what's going on, how do you keep them healthy? I assume part of it might be good, but what they're sharing, but if you can just talk about that. And then the last thing is about what part, obviously the garter snake must provide something to the environment there. And I just not aware of those snakes and what their benefits are.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So those are great questions. Thanks, Jan. So the first one is, how do we keep the birds healthy? I think that that's been an ongoing issue for refuge managers specifically, and especially on managed and private wetlands. I don't think you can it's really an issue of trying to get them as much adequate fresh water and food as you can, over as large of a space as possible. It's crowding that really contributes to the disease, and low food, so you have less resilience to disease, because part of the stoppage of the Pacific Flyway and the purpose of, as you saw in the film, it's so sweet when she blows on the bird and says that you're looking for those fat stores.
And they didn't have any.
Yeah, and they didn't have any, and it was early in the season, to be fair, when the film was shot. But I think that it really does demonstrate the importance of the food that we provide the birds, and contributing to their overall health. Later, I think another thing that the Central Valley Joint Venture wants to improve on in our 2020 management plan is expanding monitoring to actually exactly know in real time, if we can, where birds are landing, how long they stay, and why. It's incredible the amount of new programs and technology that we are starting to employ across the landscape in the last couple of years, and we just need funding to make sure that that's used in a broader scale. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating this year as a board member were numbers being reported back to us from refuge managers saying how many birds they actually saw in the Delta if they didn't have enough water. This was back in this fall, in especially the Northern California refuge area, the Sacramento complex, which was very dry, as many refuges in many areas of California were. But I think it really showed how important Delta habitat is for many different species, and potentially if there's a pattern there that we can track. If there's not enough inland wetlands, how many of those birds, like sandhill cranes, will then instead fly to the Delta to get that food that they need? Sandhill cranes are listed, so it would just be a really interesting data point and something that I am working on to see how much I can information I can gather there, and whether
So you don't try and supplement with food per se, or
no, that's really honestly a side benefit of rice cultivation, but not something that I was actively put into the management strategy for refuges, as far as I know.
is there a strategy to enlarge the wetlands?
Yes. So there is an expansion project for the San Joaquin Refuge right now that is proposed, which is really exciting. River Partners in particular is an incredible organization that I would recommend for those that are interested in looking at floodplain and refuge expansion across the Central Valley. I think in my opinion, they are just going to do wonders for our state over the next 10 years with those planned shovel-ready projects if they receive the funding, both from the state government and federal.
That's fascinating. Before you answer about the garter snake, I had a follow-up question similar. So you said, you mentioned a bit that the rice farms can help with bird flu, and I know there's a huge outbreak of avian flu right now. How does that work? Was it really just that it's more space, or?
It's a combination of more food and more space. Absolutely. And I think that we really look to refuge managers to coordinate with those rice farmers, and then the Rice Commission, which is a state entity technically, which really they all coordinate together to track avian flu outbreak and try to limit it as much as they can. That means going out into the landscape and, as you saw in the film a little bit, tracking and monitoring those birds, as well as just picking up dead birds as much as you could, really, to try to see if you can limit the spread.
Yeah, is there any concern about diseased and dead birds so close to a human food source, or is that just because we can't catch it yet, it's not really a big deal? Or
I don't want to speak for rice farmers there about that kind of concern. I don't want to misspeak.
Sure.
I don't think that that's something they've raised in conversations or meetings that I've attended. So I'm assuming that means that there's some additional protective measure that they have in place.
That's great. Okay. And then Jan, you had a question about garter snakes. I think it was, what's their role in the ecosystem there?
Yes. So giant garter snakes are a helpful listed species, both for making sure that there are additional protections put in place for wetlands, but also garter snakes use the canals as well as actual wetlands and rice farms for habitat, hibernation, and for reproduction. So because they use all three of those for their habitat, it just gives us a diverse approach, or more of a friendlier landscape approach for management of land. But really, honestly, like any other snake, they are an incredibly important predator in the ecosystem. You know, I think that when you're talking about making sure that you have a biodiverse ecosystem that's healthy, giant garter snakes are one of the few that can survive in freshwater inland in fairly cool and warm temperatures, and still provide that kind of I don't want to say rodent control, but they help provide the benefits that other predators would in a thriving ecosystem. And if you don't have that, then you have potential problems even more with invasive species, which is, as you all know, I'm sure, a growing issue in the state of California, and wetlands are no exception. I have a soft spot for giant garter snake, which I never thought I would ever say. I'm a person who's a little bit of an odd duck. Wasn't an outdoor enthusiast when I got into environmental law. I really was converted by a professor who really did believe in law school that climate change was the issue for my generation. And so I was lucky enough to have an incredible course my first year of law school about why environmental law was something that I should focus on. And I was converted. So now I'm sitting here talking to you about a small species of snake that I never thought I would know anything about. But I think that, you know, that's one of the reasons why Defenders of Wildlife has existed for 75 years, is when you look at protecting the environment through a wildlife lens, it provides multi-benefits for humans and for animals.
Absolutely, that's so perfect. I almost stepped on a giant garter snake at Pacheco, so I hope they protect Pacheco. No dam, but that's awesome. Ken, you had a question, and then Karen.
Yes, I did. Thank you. It was a very informative lecture that you had there, or presentation. I really enjoyed that. But you mentioned that there was I thought I picked up that there was some activity now legislatively to reallocate waters, especially in the South Delta. I mean, are the allocation methods that we're currently using that have been around for 50, 60 years, whatever. Are you aware of anything going on like that? I mean, really, besides people talking about it, actually legislation that they're trying to get before our Senate and House of Representatives?
That's a great question. As far as I know, there's not legislation pending before the state or the federal governments to reform water allocations in the way that we would want. If anything, there's legislation right now pending federally, at least, that would undo a lot of the good that we already have on the books for water allocations in the state of California. I'm thinking of, particularly for those that are interested, a bill by Representative Valadeo that is looking to deem the Central Valley Project Improvement Act complete, that we have doubled salmon in the state of California, apparently. We no longer need the restoration fund, and a couple other very concerning elements to his bill. I think I would pivot rather to a couple of other positive administrative movement that's happening. Ken, to answer your question, the State Water Board is supposedly finally back on track to updating the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, which would help increase freshwater flows to the Delta, which is a big deal. It would help protect the health of the estuary. I'm not going to claim that it would be enough, but it at least is a good positive step. that law and that plan has not really robustly or substantively been updated since 1995. So I think that really needs to happen. And then the other positive things that are happening include potentially the renegotiation of the San Joaquin River Exchange Contractors water contract. The Bureau of Reclamation gave them notice last fall that they would want to renegotiate that contract. That's a big deal because a lot of the actual water allocations, so not water rights or what we call paper water, but water deliveries are implemented through water contracts, which sometimes cannot be renegotiated for years on end, give very little negotiating power to the federal government or state governments, depending on what water contracts you're talking about, and are really archaic in terms of implementation, and they're not equitable either. So that's another important caveat there. And then the last little asterisks of positive hope is that there are some bills pending right now before the state government to reform water rights. So while that may not necessarily provide tangible benefits about water deliveries from the Delta or otherwise, it is a really positive step that the state legislature is acknowledging for the first time that there are serious flaws with the water rights system as it is constructed in California, and taking steps, hopefully, to pass these bills to reform elements of it. I'm not talking about overhaul major reforms. They are piecemeal, but it is a good start. And some hope for the first time for water policy advocates that we've seen in a long time.
Do you have any bill numbers or?
Yes, so 460 is by, I think, Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan.
That's my girl.
Yeah, and that bill is the one that I am the most excited about out of the three, because it gives a water board additional enforcement authority. So I don't know how many you've heard about the diversions of I think it was the Klamath River last fall, and they were only fined that water district $4,000 total for drying up the whole river. It's just a part of our water law that has not been updated. Many elements have to account for both increased fees, but also really truly making sure that penalties are truly disincentivizing bad actors.
Yeah. Reminds me of the refineries.
Yeah. We had a great water rights hearing in front of the California Assembly last week, and then the LA Times, in my opinion, did an incredible job reporting on it, which I'm very grateful for. And so for those that are interested, I would check out that article by Ian James, and it mentions the three bills, but AB 460, in my opinion, is the one that's the most promising. I'm slightly biased.
That's awesome. I was just going to ask you before when you mentioned the Clean Water Act, and I was thinking about exactly that it was only $4,000. That's nothing to some irrigation districts. So do you find enforcement a really big challenging part of your work with the Clean Water Act, or any other components of the regulations that you work on?
Yeah, I think that I'm just going to be a little bit more frank. It's a great question, Katie, that we have, in my opinion, laws on the books to properly and sustainably manage California water already.
Mm-hmm.
We really do, if they were enforced properly. It's not a problem of creating more law, even though I'm sure that we can clarify areas of law, of course, always, because law is ambiguous and depending on your interpretation. However, it is the political will that we need in the state of California to properly enforce the laws that we already have, that we know that we need to enforce and implement now. That includes the Clean Water Act, includes the Endangered Species Act, both state and federal, the Porter Cologne Act. It's It's really important. The CVPIA was passed 30 years ago this year as part of a response to that initial drought in the late 1980s to early 1990s. However, it was also revolutionary because it brought farmers and contractors and water districts to the table with environmentalists to agree to a water transfer system that was supposed to not only help wetlands and refuges, but also the health of the Delta and fisheries. It has a fish doubling objective in CVPIA that we still have not met today, 30 years later. So we're facing potentially the second in state history salmon fishery closure. Right. So I think that just has to be said, that people's livelihoods are really going to be impacted here. So if we had laws that we actually implemented in a timely manner, we would be just a little bit more resilient to the climate impacts we're facing and to the other social impacts that we're facing right now.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think because of time, we will take the last three folks with their hands up and then probably no more questions after that. So we'll go Karen, then Nancy, then Sydney.
Thank you. Your comments about the Water Quality Control Board actually looking again at standards made me wonder. I mean, my picture of it is Newsom comes barreling in and makes these what seem to be politically motivated voluntary agreements. And how do we get past when he does those voluntary agreements, which aren't necessarily going to agree at all with what scientifically based Water Quality Control Board would think was appropriate? I mean, what's your sense of how this plays out? How do we get around his politically based stuff so that we can have water decisions that are based on science and based on a legitimate process that the public can also see as a legitimate process?
That's a great question. Right now, I will I can't officially speak on behalf of defenders here
Sure.
in this case. So I'm just pointing you to what other organizations have suggested and strongly encouraging you to look into these alternatives. There is an oversight agency for the water board that even Newsom doesn't report to, and that is the federal EPA, Region 9. They are actually the ones that are legally responsible for ensuring that states adhere to certain laws. The Clean Water Act, Federal Clean Water Act, and the update of water plans like the Bay Delta Plan is one of them. EPA Region 9 has, in the last few years, grown in size for the first time since I attended law school. They have hired scientists and new staff who are brilliant, very, very passionate, and looking into right now the water actions that California has chosen to take over the last year or so. I think that that's very promising.
Yeah.
Additionally, Restore the Delta and a coalition of other incredible environmental justice groups and tribal entities have filed a petition with the EPA.
I'd seen that. That made me happy.
And that is moving forward. So I think that there's potential for movement there. And I'm hopeful that additional advocacy by other environmental NGOs about the other various different processes in the meantime, as well as educating our legislators about the lack of enforcement of water quality protections. I think is the most general thing I can say are the ways that we're going to try to get around some of this political backlog.
It would be nice if that could help us win in court, because I look at the latest iteration, the so-called Delta conveyance, and it's just a conveyance to worse water quality.
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
for the Bay Delta estuary.
So
without question.
the more that we have avenues to get back to scientifically based opinions of what you can and can't do to continue to have drinkable water, a functioning estuary, living species, better. So I'm glad to know about the expansion and the improvement with the EPA, the district here. That's encouraging.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you, Karen. Nancy? You're muted.
I'm sorry to take up this time. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, we may be talking about the same article. It was in Monday in the LA Times.
Yeah,
and-
I'm gonna bring it up after we're done with Ashley too. I have a link for everyone.
Okay, I just wanted to say the Shasta River, is that the same as the Klamath River that was dried up? Okay.
Yes, potentially. I
Wondered.
spoke potentially earlier, Nancy. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Nancy. And Sydney?
Hi. So I wanted to state that a few minutes ago I thought I heard a couple pieces of good news, but I was trying to multitask while I was listening in. I was making some soaps actually, or soap colors, because I'm kind of working on a project and I just had kind of some stuff going on today. But I actually did want to go over those pieces of good news because I definitely could use some good news today. And I didn't quite comprehend what they were. I kind of got the gist of it, but my apologies. Is there any way that somebody could kind of explain to me what exactly happened, or maybe sometime later this week, or maybe Katie, do you think you can tell me? Like, I think I
can
know.
speak to the Bay Delta Quality Control Plan. I think you mentioned something else, Ashley.
Just the water rights bills that are pending before the
Yeah.
legislature, they provide some hope.
Yeah, we can talk about the water rights bills later. And then Nancy, I saw your hand go up again. Did you have a follow-up to what you were gonna
Oh,
say?
I tried to lower it.
Okay. Great. Okay, we already kept Ashley 15 minutes longer than I told her we would. So Ashley, this was amazing. You are brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think we want to have you back at some point. Maybe we'll give you 6 months to a year, but please come back. This was fantastic. You
And we
know
and
so
you did
much.
love the film. It was beautiful and informative.
Yes, it was.
Scenic, and,
Beautiful,
you know.
peaceful film. Yeah, that was very
Mhm.
relaxing. Just that was some good news, Sydney, just seeing the whole film and everything they're working on there. So
Right.
Are you talking about the video that you wanted us to watch over the week?
Mhm.
Or
yep, the short film that was Ashley's group, the Central Valley Joint Venture.
yeah,
You-
honestly, I'm gonna have to confess, I still need to watch it. I still have it saved on my iPad and I plan to watch it at some point. But
Great. Yeah, it'll definitely give you
Yeah.
the good news you're looking for. So.
Yeah.
did I
absolutely.
actually hear that like some kind of species didn't really need protection anymore, and then something about putting water in the delta?
I don't think that there's any species that I know of that I work to protect that doesn't need protection anymore. I would say that they really do need additional protections. But I do think that there are some species right now that will help put additional water in the delta. So there's the listing right now of longfin smelt, which is happening under the Federal Endangered Species Act, which longfin smelt really do thrive off of additional freshwater cold flows, specifically in deep water habitats. So that's really positive for a healthy estuary. And if that listing goes through, that's currently happening right now, then that will help provide additional mitigation and cold water to the delta. And then there's additional tracking potentially of birds using the delta when there's not enough water on the landscape for inland wetlands. So that I'm looking into, and that would, if I can get additional data and metrics to support it, would help provide additional linkage for why we need more habitat and a healthy delta for bird species as well.
Absolutely.
I thought that the pieces of good news I thought I heard that like a species was being taken off the list, and I thought I heard something about restoring water in the delta, like some kind of legislation that's supposed to do that or something.
We can talk more about that later, but let's let Ashley get going, and thank you again so much for this. This was
I just like to
fantastic.
point out one thing that most people don't know, and I found out by being in a meeting about salmon closures last week,
Mm,
is that a longtime fishing guide and a friend of mine that I've known for over 30 years has petitioned the California Fish and Game Commission for the listing of the fall run Chinook salmon under the California Endangered Species Act. He's also applying for a federal listing. My only concern with the endangered species listing is that they really haven't done a lot for coho salmon, for delta smelt, for winter run Chinook. They prevented the winter run Chinook from going completely extinct, but they kept them just, hovering at the edge of extinction. And, and the listing for delta smelt hasn't, in other words, the state government and federal governments haven't followed the law, and they haven't taken this delta smelt seriously. And I've been the main researcher on this, in terms of journalists. And LA Times, other papers that do some good work, they're not really covering the deep stuff on the delta smelt, and they're virtually extinct now. And the fish that they're only sustained now through a hatchery program. And they've gone 5 or 6 years in a row where they found no delta smelt. In a survey that when it started, the delta smelt were the most abundant and numbered in the millions, where they were just found everywhere, to the point where they could be annoying to people at times. So that's just a kind of an update. We're going to probably have a listing, and he told me, he says, I don't know what we can do, so I'm doing this as a saying we need to take action on the fall run to do, because they aren't doing it. They manage all these species into the edge of extinction.
mhm.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. It's really true. I wish I could tell you it wasn't. I think that it does. I like the saying says, take a village, and decades of work. And I think there's still quite a bit of work still left to be done. Absolutely, especially when it comes to protecting fisheries in California. And that's a big part of my work. And I look forward to seeing how many different organizations and many different advocates can help change that. I don't think that the Endangered Species Act is going to be the victor to help save every single species. Do I think it's an incredible law in the books and one of the only that we has enforcement and teeth? Yes. It's a great tool in the toolbox that we need to employ. But there are many of other tools, and we need to use all of them at this point to prevent extinction. That's what we're looking at. Absolutely.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I didn't know about this at all, and good information.
It's my pleasure. And thank you so much again, Katie, for having me. Thank you all for giving me your time. And I'm more than happy to come back. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. Take care. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.
Okay, folks, so I've got an agenda for the rest of the night, and we might end up being here quite a while because there's still so much to cover. But if at any point people are like, okay, stop talking, we can always pick up next week. So
I got a meeting at 7.
yeah, no worries. maybe I'll just talk on the most important thing. So March 16th, which I think is next, is that Thursday?
Thursday,
Yeah.
Wednesday, where's it? Oh, I don't know. Things.
Thursday. It's next Thursday. Yeah. On next Thursday, there's a vote at Santa Clara Valley Water District on Pacheco Dam on funding it. So this is a big vote. Remember I said that special snake we were talking about, the giant garter snake, I almost stepped on one in the Pacheco area, and so they're over there, they need protection. There's also a lot of really rare butterflies and irises and just like all of the prettiest things nature can offer live in that area, and the dam would kill them. So the alert for that will go out probably Friday or Monday. So you'll get all the info there. Check your email, and then I'll also include that info in our regular Monday email, so folks can call in. I think even if you don't live in the Santa Clara Valley Water District, I think it's important to call in anyway. So that's an important thing. And then
Do we need to register?
you don't have to register. It'll just look out for that email because it'll have the talking points, the time and date, the links, all of that stuff.
So basically you're gonna send it in the weekly email.
I will send it in the weekly email, but it's also going to come from probably Molly Colton, maybe Erin Woolley on Monday or Friday as its own email too.
Okay, it's good to know like who it's gonna come from, because I got so many emails. And
I
do you
know,
know
right?
exactly, you know what time it will be on Thursday?
The time that the meeting is, that I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that yet, but usually 12 or 1 is when most of these meetings take place.
And we want to vote no, correct?
Right, yeah, tell them vote no. No on funding the next iteration or next step of the Pacheco Dam. So that's important. And then the article that we were talking about with the water rights, which was really great. I was with someone when they were getting interviewed. I'll put that in here just for anyone who wants to see it, but there are a few other things too. I just want to make sure you have the article. And then okay, next week, I know our actions for the next 2 weeks. Next week, I think we will write some nice letters for one. So if you want a positive thing, we're gonna write some thank yous. And the week after that, we're gonna do some science brainiac things. Nice to use our brains in different ways on different weeks. So if anyone needs to go now, just letting you know that that's what we're going to do the next 2 weeks. But otherwise, and I'll get back to updates if anyone needs to hop off. So Gloria Gray, our favorite ex chair of water boards. So remember how she was, running that race to be the chair of the water board, but at the same time, she was running for mayor of Inglewood. And we're like, Gloria, you can't do both. Well, we didn't think she would win. We thought she had a snowball's chance in a warm place for that. So turns out they went into a runoff, and then she had her election round 2 yesterday, and she's actually winning. So right now she's in the lead. I think we'll know by Friday because Inglewood's somewhat small. It's not the biggest place. Should be easy to, count those votes. So if she wins, that means she's gone. She is off the water board because she can't do both. So let's all hope that
I thought she was already off the water board.
She lost her seat as chair, but she's still there as a director.
Yes.
So now she'd be gone from Mets.
She is queen.
Yeah, unless she finds some way to, fudge the laws and break them and do illegal stuff, which I would not be surprised about. But, if she follows the law, she should be gone if she wins this race. So, good luck to the city of Inglewood, but also kind of hope she wins. So, and then that means hooray, someone else will have to take her seat, I think from Inglewood, or maybe from another West Basin seat, which West Basin does have some good ones. Scott Houston is on there. We like him. I think he's even a Sierra Club member, if not a member, definitely like an ally who's always thinking about the environment. But, we would definitely push for him to get the seat. So, and then there's a couple other good, Desi Alvarez, he's a good one. So there's some good options. So let's hope she wins her race.
Yeah. We can always say we helped her.
Yes, exactly. You know what? I forgot that I'm still recording.